The only thing that Tulsi Gabbard is good at is foreign policy. That's all her legislation is focused on. That's all her conversations are focused on. That's all she talks about. That's what they say anyway. But I'm here to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that's not the case. Let's talk about it. The general sentiment of the entire Democratic primary election has been that Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard simply doesn't have the domestic policy chops nor the progressive credentials to stand up with the likes of people like Bernie Sanders or even Elizabeth Warren in some people's minds, which is crazy to me. But I am here today to tell you that is simply not the case. See, in front of me, I have a list. This list includes legislation that Tulsi Gabbard has either authored or co-authored. There are a few in here that she co-sponsored. And also included is statements that only Tulsi Gabbard has made or action that only Tulsi Gabbard has taken in this election. So let's go down this list really quick. The Stop Arming Terrorists Act, which she introduced right after her trip to Syria, which we'll talk about in a second, where she says, hey, United States, can we stop giving money and weapons to terrorists? Seems pretty commonsensical, right? Unfortunately, no one in this race has co-sponsored or co-introduced this legislation in the House or the Senate. The War Powers Amendment, Saving America's Pollinators Act. If you understand the bee crisis and its influence potentially over climate change, you understand that Saving America's Pollinators Act is no small potato, all right? Reinstatement of Glass-Steagall. She authored the legislation to legalize marijuana. She also introduced the Opioid Crisis and Accountability Act, Keep Families Together Act, the Equality Act, the legislation to protect net neutrality. And by the way, the Equality Act ensured that the LGBTQ community had the exact same protections under the Civil Rights Act as Black people, women, or other marginalized groups. Legislation to improve Social Security, Water Affordability, Transparency, Equity, and Reliability Act, because water is life. College for All, the Nurse Staffing Standards for Hospital Patient Safety and Quality Care Act, Inclusive Prosperity Act, which includes funding for both public education and Medicare for All. You know, the Medicare for All that everybody swears Tulsi doesn't support because she has two issues with it and decided, well, I'm running for president, so I should probably introduce my own healthcare single-payer legislation. Of course, she also co-sponsored and co-introduced Medicare for All, but has her own single-payer plus legislation that mimics very similarly the Australian medical system, which, by the way, is the #1 medical system in the world. She introduced the Off Fossil Fuels Act, also known as the OFF Act, which is considered the most aggressive climate change legislation, not in the history of the United States, but, ladies and gentlemen, in the history of the world. This legislation was co-sponsored by over 400 climate and environmentalist organizations, and no other legislation has come close to this. She also introduced the Securing America's Elections Act to allow if you're going to have technology, that it must be open source and it must be blockchain, which is absolutely fantastic. Because with blockchain technology, ladies and gentlemen, if you did try to rig an election or rig a voter machine, we would be able to track you. We would be able to figure out exactly who did it and how you tried to do it. But also, it is a mandatory paper ballot bill. Mandatory hand-counted, voter-verified paper ballots. Oh, but it gets even better, ladies and gentlemen, because it is an automatic audit included in this bill as well. The Securing America's Elections Act, which most people did not talk about, but could change the face of democratic politics in this country as we know it. The funding to improve infrastructure and jobs also included, there's also a mechanism for infrastructure and jobs included in the OFF Act as a separate clause. The Protect Oceans and Fish Sustainability Act, the federal assault weapons ban, sustainable energy, DACA, mass violence protection, various federal minimum wage legislation, including the most recent one for $15 minimum wage that was passed in the House, by the way. A bill to end the war in Syria, not once, but twice. Once introduced in 2015, before a lot of the world had been woken up to exactly what was happening in Syria and how involved we really, were. And in 2019, while running for president. I know what a lot of you may be thinking. Well, that's not true, because if she really introduced a bill to end the war in Syria, wouldn't every progressive be talking about it? I mean, if maybe Bernie Sanders or Ro Khanna or AOC introduces legislation, it would be all over the place. Therefore, it couldn't have been introduced if it wasn't covered. Well, I have some bad news for you, ladies and gentlemen. It was introduced, and we were the ones who covered it. Simply put, no one else decided to co-sponsor it. The bill to end the war in Yemen, which many of you are already familiar with, she wants to legalize and decriminalize all drugs. She wants to ban completely and totally private prisons from existence. She introduced a bill to protect BDS, introduced with Ilhan Omar, the only presidential candidate in the field to go to Standing Rock in support of the water protectors. The only presidential candidate in the field to go to Syria to learn the truth about what was taking place. The only presidential candidate in the field who cast a doubt on the alleged chemical weapons attacks of 2017 and 2018, and then was proven right about her doubts after a leaked OPCW report supported her theory that America was not exactly doing its due diligence in proving that Assad had committed those attacks. The only candidate in the field who answered the phone and stood with the survivors and the families of victims of 9/11 when they opened a federal lawsuit after new research from the University of Alaska had emerged. She then introduced legislation to find out what parties are actually responsible for 9/11 so that we could hold them accountable, as we should. Not only was she the only one who answered the phone, but she was the only one to talk about this. And to my knowledge, there are no presidential candidates now or before that co-sponsored or co-introduced this legislation to make sure we hold the right people accountable for 9/11. She also co-sponsored HR 40 to establish a committee to study and then distribute reparations. She's also the only candidate to challenge the intelligence community substantively. She's the only candidate who would pardon Julian Assange, Manning, and Snowden, and create infrastructure for whistleblowers who wish to call out illegal actions by the United States government. She left the vice chair position at the DNC specifically on the grounds that they were cheating Bernie Sanders in 2016, and then said, "The Clintons don't scare me," when asked about the future of her career for standing up to the Clintons, because everybody knows, well, the Clintons can kill your career pretty quick in multiple ways. And she also predicted, finally, that Trump would escalate tensions with Iran by any means months before Soleimani's assassination, and that we shouldn't believe anything coming from the Trump administration and Trump himself regarding the Iran conflict, because at the end of the day, they only want war. She predicted this months in advance. Has Trump done anything but lie? Has Trump done anything but escalate with Iran? She was proven right. And that ABC interview, by the way, with George Stephanopoulos was subsequently taken down after Tulsi Gabbard was proven right. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Clearly, there has been a huge misconception about the progressive policy chops, domestic or otherwise, of Tulsi Gabbard. The truth is, this is only what she's introduced or been a part of in the last 3 to 4 years, not even the entirety of her career. If we dig into the history of her career, we'll find out that Tulsi Gabbard, although not perfect, but who is one of the most fervent fighters for climate change, for environmental justice, has always stood with the indigenous. And she's the only one who has been bold enough and brave enough to admit her mistakes and admit she is not perfect and apologize full-throatedly and from the heart for who she was and tell us exactly how she learned and how she grew to be the woman, congresswoman, and presidential candidate that we have learned her to be today. At the end of the day, there's a reason Hillary Clinton hates her. There's a reason they keep her off the stage. There's a reason people don't cover the legislation that she introduces. Even though, as you've heard, she's not only introduced some, random feel-good pieces of progressive legislation. The Protect Our Pollinators Act could literally change the course of climate change one way or the other. The Off Fossil Fuels Act, endorsed by 400 climate environmental organizations. We could have been started reversing the effects of climate change when she introduced it the first time in 2017. The Securing America's Elections Act is revolutionary. Of course, the hand-counted paper ballots, voter-verified paper ballots, and automatic audits are all cool. But when you're talking about blockchain technology so that if anyone even tried to hack the system, we would be able to catch them and not even have to guess about who it is, that's revolutionary and something that hasn't even been done around the world. Cutting edge stuff. So when we're talking about Tulsi Gabbard's domestic policy chops, it isn't just she introduces progressive legislation. She introduces revolutionary progressive legislation. And to be quite honest with you, that very well might be the reason you don't ever hear about them. Because if you talk about Tulsi's legislation, well, then you might find out that there is more than just a couple progressive powerhouses on the block. And then, hell, who knows? God forbid, you might exercise your right to choose Tulsi Gabbard and democracy will take its place. I know, exercising democracy is not really welcomed in 2019 and 2020. But I'm here to tell you, if you were looking for a reason to exercise democracy instead of being told who to pick, I just listed off about 30. And with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for tuning into that live stream segment of Mikasa Sukasa. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure, by the way, that you donate to Tulsi Gabbard's campaign, because in the description, I have a link. That link is a donation contest. If you donate to Tulsi's campaign and you are the lucky winner, then guess what, ladies and gentlemen? You get to go skiing with Tulsi in New Hampshire on their dollar. You get to go snowboarding with her. Or skiing. I prefer snowboarding. You get to go hang out with Tulsi. And anyone who's ever won any of the contests from Tulsi, they'll tell you he keeps up with her end of the bargain. And I can vouch for that. All right? So if you want to participate in that contest, or of course, if you want to help the campaign, most importantly, go donate whatever you can to that link in the description below. And always remember, more than anything else, find your balance. Peace. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and hit that notification bell if you like that segment of Mikasa Sukasa. Of course, if YouTube is giving you trouble, as it always does, you can download the Rockfin app and follow us there. Also, if you want to continue to help our show grow, you can help us reach our goal of 500 patrons on Patreon and donate as little as $1. Really, anything helps. Other than that, always remember, people, more than anything else, find your balance.